Greetings to everyone. It's been a little bit of a while since I've done a live program. I've done some recorded ones in the past year. I think we're well over 20. I don't know how many I've done for CSP. It's always a pleasure to speak to this group, this growing group. And I'd like to welcome the University Synagogue in Irvine. I had the pleasure of lecturing there live. Was it a year ago or 2 years ago? So that was a fun experience. Today, I'm going to be speaking about something a little different from some of my earlier presentations. I'm going to focus on the city of Rome, a place where I've lived a lot during my life. You heard that I was at the American Academy of Rome as a fellow in the 1980s. I've always loved the city, and I've had some broad knowledge of the Jewish history through my research, through my teaching. I've written a few things, but I thought it would be fun when Ari and Cheryl asked me what would I like to do a deeper dive, but a broad brush approach at the same time to the Jewish presence in the city over millennia. So we're going to start with Antiquity because Jews have been in Rome for a long time, and I'm going to share my screen now. I hope I get the right one. Let's see. Let me make sure this is the right one. I'm going to move forward one. No, okay, it looks like it's not moving. So let me stop share and share a different one. So always works when we're setting up, but not always. Let's try this one, slideshow from beginning, and see whether this works. Yes, okay. So Jews have been in Rome, of course, for a long, long time. And there's a lot to talk about in that history. There are lacunae, there are big gaps in our knowledge, but we can trace the Jewish presence in the city for over 2 millennia. They've made an impact on Rome. Jews have made an impact on Rome over the centuries, and Rome has made a big impact on Jews and, by extension, Judaism. So today we're going to start with the ancient city. Next week we'll move into the early Middle Ages, the Renaissance, that area before the institution of the Ghetto in 1555. The third talk will be about the Ghetto, life in the Ghetto, and I hope that we'll do some further talks taking us into the 19th and 20th century as we go forward, but we haven't scheduled those yet. But it's an important part of history that is often neglected, but actually has great significance today in the 21st century. So when did Jews first show up in Rome? We don't really know. And that term, we don't really know, is something I could apply to almost every aspect of this discussion. So just take it as a given. The information we have on Jewish life, Jewish presence in Rome, in antiquity, sometimes is very, very specific, but at the same time, it's very hard to generalize from it. For any diaspora community, this is always a problem because history only gives us scraps of material from which to build a story and be able to confirm information. Compared to all the other diaspora communities of the ancient world, and even centuries later, we have an enormous amount of material from Rome, so we do have stories we can tell. But how it fits in the broader context of the city and of Jewish life is up for debate. And most of the scholarly work over the last century or more is a back and forth, almost a kind of a Talmudic pilpul of debate, whether Jews behave this way or that way, whether they spoke this language or that language, whether they belonged to this synagogue or that synagogue, whether they were in this profession or that profession, because we're dealing with limited information, and who knows about all the information we don't have. This is a problem every ancient historian has. How much can you accept the record that has come down to us as indicative of the whole? That said, we do have certain information that comes from documentary sources, Roman literary sources. Surprisingly, Jews do get mentioned by many of the most famous Jewish Roman writers, and archaeological evidence. And this talk will mostly deal with the archaeological evidence, but I want to give you some little hint of the documentary history beforehand as we go forward. Jews apparently show up in Rome for the first time, or at least noted as such, when the Romans come to get, the Jews come to Rome to try to get support in their fight against the Greeks, what we know as the great, as the Jewish revolt against Antiochus that ends up leading us to the holiday of Hanukkah. We don't have a lot of information about the Maccabee delegation to Rome, but I'm showing you this slide here, this image here, because the story of the Maccabees will resonate in Rome for a long time, not so much with Jews, but with Christians in later ages. So this is a fresco in the Christian Church of Santa Maria Antiqua, which has not been visible to the public for almost a century, but has now been restored and is open. It's in the Roman Forum, and it shows a scene from the book of Maccabees, which of course is not part of the Hebrew Bible, but became part of the Christian Bible. And so the Maccabee story takes on resonance in Christian tradition, sometimes more than more than for Jews. But this is a scene from this mother Salomone and her 7 sons, all of whom were martyred, and they became much celebrated, particularly in the Eastern Christian Church. And it was the Eastern Christian Church under the Byzantine period that had sway in Rome, and therefore we find this image in an important church just at the base of the Palatine Hill. But there may have been some conniving going on, because we have a much later report of an expulsion of Jews from Rome. It's sort of a hearsay type of thing, but there probably was no settled community at the time, so it might have been people who came with one of these various political delegations in the 2nd century BCE, and they might have been accused of proselytizing or of interfering in some way, or it might have just been anti-immigrant or anti-foreigner fervor. The problem is even the one source, which comes decades and decades later than the fact, isn't entirely reliable, but it gets cited all the time in the literature, so I'm mentioning it to you now. Now, the next big moment in Jewish-Roman relations is when Pompey the Great, consul, soldier, a conqueror, carries out his Syrian campaign in the east, and that includes the occupation of Jerusalem and his famous entering of the Holy of Holies in the temple. He didn't desecrate, he didn't remove anything, didn't steal anything, and afterward gave permission for all the temple rites to go forward. But it was a critical point in the relationships between the two nations, because Rome actually asserted dominance at that time, and essentially from then on, Judea, as it became known under Rome, was a client state, and then eventually a province. We have this in Jewish tradition a lot. There's a lot of oral history about Pompey's visit, and this I'm just showing you as an illustration from the 15th century, a French illustration. But I do want you to note for future lectures the spiral columns that the French artist Jean Fouquet includes in his depiction of the temple of Solomon. It's actually the Temple of Herod. No, sorry, at this time, it's not the Temple of Herod, it's the Second Temple, because these spiral columns would, in the 15th century, were believed to, there's a series of them in Rome that we will see, and they become very influential in Christian and Jewish architecture because of their the belief that they came from the temple in Jerusalem. So Jews had already spread throughout the Eastern Mediterranean and throughout the Mediterranean world in the Hellenistic period. The Maccabee delegation might have been the first to show up in Rome, but Jews had certainly been in southern Italy and along the Mediterranean coast for quite some time. There were large Jewish communities in port cities especially, and in the east, Alexandria and Antioch had especially large communities, but there were many others. And this is a map from Bernavi's a very good atlas of the Jewish people, which gives you some idea of the expansion, the settlement of Jews throughout what would be the Roman Empire from the 1st to 4th century. The Jews came to Rome for many reasons. So they were probably already in Italy as traders and settlers. You know how Israelis leave Israel now and they're all over the world. Jews have always, it's a small place, so Jews have moved beyond for opportunities. But after Pompey's actions in Judea, and then later in the 1st century, because of the revolt and the suppression by the Flavians of the great Jewish revolt of 66 to 73. Also, Jewish slaves were sent. And even though many of these slaves were probably liberated soon after, because it was one of the functions of Jewish communities to ransom, to rescue enslaved compatriots, slavery was certainly a force that moved a lot of Jews throughout the Roman world. The revolt of 66 to 73, of course, changed the status of Jews in the Eastern Mediterranean and in Judea. It doesn't seem to have greatly affected the existing Jewish community that we know was already in Rome. We don't know much about this community, but we know they included some elites, because many Jews, some of them associated with the royal house of Herod, but also intellectuals and others, were confidants and friends of the Julian dynasty, of the families of the emperors. Also, there seems to have been already an active Jewish community in the city, which did not seem to have any draconian kind of policies forced upon them because of what was happening to their fellow Jews in the East. But Vespasian and then his 2 children, Titus and Domitian, all 3 of them became emperors. The Roman War, the Roman-Jewish War was the major effort of their reign, of their dynasty, both because of the time it took to suppress the Jewish revolt, but also once they succeeded, in the amount of booty, of gold and slaves they were able to bring back to Rome, which allowed them to finance many of their programs. One of those big programs was the building of the Colosseum. Of course, you all know the Colosseum. We think of it as, it's funny, in Rome, it's celebrated by Christians as a place of Christian martyrdom because of all the stories about Christians being fed to the lions there. Jews focus on the Arch of Titus as a site of memory, and less so in the Colosseum, but the Colosseum probably was a place of Jewish suffering to some extent that we don't know. Certainly gold from the temple and gold plundered from Judea helped pay for the Flavian building programs in Rome, especially the Colosseum, but also slaves probably helped were conscripted to build this massive structure, which took about 10 years to erect. On the left is a statue of Titus that I just happened to photograph this last March when I was down in Pompeii, in Naples. This is a statue erected to Titus in the town of Herculaneum, literally months before Vesuvius erupted. So he was, the Flavians were the reigning imperial house at that time. We know there probably were a lot of Jews around the Bay of Naples. We know there were ancient Jews in Pozzuoli and in Naples, probably also in Pompeii, but that's another topic. So the Arch of Titus gets erected by Titus's brother, Domitian, when he becomes emperor after Titus's death, but it celebrates the great processional triumph of 10 years before that was celebrated after the fall of Jerusalem. And we're all familiar with the image of the soldiers carrying the table of the showbread, and also of the menorah, and my friend Steve Fine has written a whole book essentially about this. But it's important to remember that this became an iconic image for Jews and for pagans and for Christians, for centuries to come. And this image of the menorah, however accurate it is, because there may have been multiple menorahs back in the temple, becomes the essential sign of the Jewish people for centuries, even millennia to come, until it's really replaced by the Magen David in recent times. Now, in the Middle Ages, as we'll see next week, this arch was kind of encapsulated by other buildings. It was part of a fortress, so it wasn't as visible as in antiquity and as in modern times. But the knowledge of what it was and what it celebrated remained strong within the Jewish psyche. So here's a detail of that wonderful relief. And Steve Fine, in his studies, has shown that, like all Roman sculpture, this would have been painted with different colors. You might have seen, and some of you who were in New York might have seen an exhibition that was at Yeshiva University Museum a number of years ago at the Center for Jewish History, in which a full-size replica of this was created with different lights showing what the different colors might have been, probably a blue background, the gold for the menorah, and for other aspects of the spoils. But it wasn't only slaves who came to Rome in antiquity. We have other accounts, hard to verify them, but we know from a few passages in the Talmud and legendary tales that grew up afterward about Palestinian rabbis coming to Rome, some temporarily and some to stay, actually, as teachers and scholars. The most famous of these is Rabbi Akiva, and there's a passage which talks about Akiva and some of his companions coming up from Pozzuoli down by the Bay of Naples to Rome, and acknowledging the splendor of the city and the success of Rome, and discussing how God could allow, how could the sinners succeed so well when the people of Israel are suffering. And he says, that's why I'm laughing for those who violate his will. It's so splendid. Just imagine how much more splendid it's going to be for those who are going to follow his will and will be rewarded. That's certainly a glass half full attitude that Akiva had at that time. You can see this is an estimate of his peregrinations through the Eastern Mediterranean. And some of these same routes will be repeated in the Middle Ages, when a Spanish traveler, Benjamin of Tudela, will actually visit many of these same places. And in the East, those of you who are familiar with Christian literature and the travels of St. Paul, Paul goes and speaks to a lot of the congregations that are in the cities that are actually indicated on this map. So in Rome, Rome wasn't just a place for merchants. It wasn't a place for political intrigues. It was also, there was a religious teaching and study there. And we know at least of one school by Matteo ben Heresh, one school that was founded there in the 2nd century. And he came from Judea and founded a school there and became quite prominent. And we don't have a lot of his writings, but he's mentioned in the Pirkei Avot, the Ethics of the Fathers, and his most famous little motto is, meet each man with friendly greeting, be the tail among lions rather than the head among foxes. And you can, on your own time, you can decide exactly what that means. But now we get into the city of Rome. And here we have some more concrete literally concrete materials to deal with, because in Rome, beginning in the early 17th century, 1602, there has been a series of discoveries of Roman burial grounds on the periphery of the city. Jews, like everyone else, were not allowed to be buried within the walls of the city, and there were also Jewish rules of purity, which also forbade that kind of burial within proximity of where Jews were living. But in all, 5 or 6, depending how you count them, Jewish burial grounds, which we call catacombs, after the Christian name applied to similar burial names because of a geographic location, a place called Catacombs. But these are underground burial grounds, cemeteries, and we see them we found them in other places in Malta, in Sardinia, and in the Holy Land. This was a way to maximize space for burial at the lowest possible cost. And in this map of Rome, you can see, here's the Colosseum right in the center, and on the periphery are these cemeteries. But where all the crosses are, these are Christian cemeteries. So we have 5 or 6, depending on how you interpret them, known Jewish catacombs, burial grounds, of which only 2 survive today. But there are about 60 Christian ones. So that's partly maybe the accident of discovery, because people weren't looking for Jewish catacombs. They didn't pay attention to them. They didn't save them. So there might have been more, but it also reflects the rapid Christianization of the Roman Empire and Rome itself, beginning in the 3rd and especially the 4th and 5th centuries, which would have meant many more people were Christian than were Jewish. So the need for more burial space makes sense. The physical similarities between the Christian and the Jewish catacombs are very strong. And sometimes, without any inscriptions or decoration, it is impossible to distinguish. But usually there's enough information that we can determine who actually used these burial grounds. There's also a pagan tradition of underground burial, but not so strong, because the pagans, they alternated different periods between cremation and inhumation, but they didn't need these big cemeteries for thousands of graves for full inhumation that Jews and Christians required. So of the 2 that survive, the Villa Torlonia catacomb, which was discovered in 1919, and the Vignerandanini catacomb, which was discovered in the 1850s, provide us with a rich array of decoration, and especially inscriptions commemorating the dead who are buried in these places. Now, there were thousands and thousands of burials in these spaces. I think the estimate is about, from the cemeteries that we know, about 12,000, which is still only a small part of the Jewish population of Rome at any given time. It's estimated that the Jewish population of Rome in Antiquity, from the 1st, certainly in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th century, was between 20 and 60,000 any given time. But Jews occupied Rome for so many centuries. So we're talking about 7, 8 generations over the period of peak Roman power. So that means probably hundreds of thousands of burials. So we don't have the graves for that many people. So we just have to guess, were there more graves or were there other options? It's unknown. But where we do have the graves, we have a lot of information of the people who were buried, over approximately 600 inscriptions, which give us some fragment often at least a name, sometimes a profession, sometimes a place where they lived or a synagogue they belonged to, and sometimes even more information. Um, the special decoration is rather limited, and it's in a few little chambers, what we call cubiculi, because they're little cubic chambers in which there are larger burial arches, what we call this is an arcosolium, and then there's a kind of a coffin underneath where the body would be, and the back wall gets painted. And these are the most splendidly decorated. We have this one is from the Villa Torlonia, and then we have two very beautifully painted cubiculi from the Vigna Randonini catacomb, and then there are many others more which have fragments of decoration. You can see that the symbolic representation used in these catacombs, at least in these cubiculi, is very Jewish. We have the menorahs, very prominent, flanking a Torah ark. So we know that these arks were used in synagogues at this time. And if you look very carefully, you can see the scrolls. They're lying horizontally. There are probably 6 scrolls in this ark. And then we also have a jug, probably for oil or wine. We have a shofar. We have other implements associated with temple worship. And we also have decoration in the form of, and I'll get to these again with a little more detail in a minute, of little glass plates. These are made by having one piece of glass and then pressing gold leaf to and engraving it with a design, and then adding clear glass on top and having them fused. These were used as markers in the catacombs. None of them have been found in situ, but I'll show you in a minute. We have one where the impression is there, so we know it came from there. But these seem to have been used as markers to seal graves. But much of the same imagery that you find in this arcosolium painting is also found in these little glass, these gold glass dishes.
Sam?
Yes.
One question about this one. Do we have a date to this? Do we know?
I'm avoiding giving dates because every book you read will give you a different one, and every decade the scholars seem to prefer something different. Definitely scholarship now is leaning toward later dates for most of the catacombs and the catacomb decoration. By later, I mean 3rd through 5th century. You'll still read a lot of books putting some of this to the 1st and 2nd century, but close analysis of the masonry, close analysis of the paleography, the way the letters, of the philology of the words, of the types of inscriptions, comparison with pagan and Christian sources, and a whole host of other very fine-tuned studies push a lot of these decorations later. People are usually safe when they say late 3rd to 4th century, but some of these things may go into the 5th century. And we're going to see that when we look at the synagogue in Ostia in about 5 minutes. So Leonard Rutgers has done the most detailed work in recent years, and he pushes the dates pretty late. But you'll still read early accounts that push things, because we have these references in the classical literature from the 1st century. I mean, I didn't even read you Augustus. Well, I'll show you in a minute. I'll read this quote. Augustus himself is referring to Jews. So we know that Jews were around. So people want to push the archaeological evidence there. But of course, they weren't dating anything because they didn't have a dating system the way we use it. So we have to rely on these other circumstances. The types of burials tend to be standard in the Christian and in the Jewish catacombs, except in the Vigna Randonini catacomb, we get a different type of sort of slotted burial, which I'm showing you here on the right. Most of the catacombs look something like this image on the left. They're long galleries. This is actually one with only 2 levels of slots, what we call loculi, where you actually put the body and then you seal it up with bricks or plaster. Sometimes there'll be 3 and even 4. But at the Vigna Randonini, we also have narrow slots that are deep, so the bodies are put in lengthwise. And this is a type of tomb we find in around in the East, in Israel and elsewhere as well. So to my knowledge, Christians are not using this type of burial, but they're not that common. They're not that common. And so their presence has led people, every little thing leads people to say, well, whoever built this must have come from this particular place. But there are also practical explanations, because it's a space saver as well when you're pressed for space in one of these catacombs. These 2 images I come from just in March, when I was in the Vigna Randonini catacomb with these are by my friend David Rini, who took these ones. But you can see the little slots up top, and these are for children. There was a very high mortality rate for infants and young children across all populations in the ancient world. And so we have a lot of small locali for children. And we're going to get to one of the gravestones for a child in just a minute. These are the Vigna Randonini cubicolo, and you can see they're very different. These 2 are very different from what we just saw in the Villa Torlonia. In part, these 2 cubiculi have pagan or at least secular scenes and types of decoration that were very common in all sorts of Roman pagan or Roman non-religious contexts, houses and meeting halls and the like. You can give symbolic meaning to some of these symbols if you like. Peacocks, for instance, have meanings in paganism and Christianity and Judaism. If anyone's listening from the Walnut Street Shul here in Boston, you guys have great peacocks stuck up on the painted on your ceiling, you know, of from the 1920s, maybe. We don't know the exact date, which I've talked about in another lecture. But they're also generic. So you know, the famous scholar Erwin Goodenough wanted to give, you know, layers and layers of meaning to every symbol that you could find. And other people, beginning with Harry Leon, who wrote the first really good book in English on the Jews of Rome and the Catacombs, and it's still a great book. He was more saying sometimes a bird is just a bird. You know, these are standard decorations, and there's been some confirmation in that in recent decades. Maybe Jody Magnus will talk about this when she speaks, because we have so much classical and essentially pagan imagery that is used in synagogue decoration in Israel and in Eretz Israel, that it just seems very much that it's part of the visual language and the meaning without the layers of meaning that it might have had when it was first used. I mean, we all do this. I mean, I'm very conscious. I've been using CE dates, Common Era dates, when I speak to you, but many people will still, you know, we'll talk about we're living in 1920. I'm sorry, 2000. I'm living in the past. 2025. AD. AD stands for Anno Domini, which means the year of our Lord. But if we're Jews, you know, that's not our Lord. But we still use those dates. So, you know, there's a migration of forms, whether visual forms, images, icons, and of words, that they go through changes, and often the original purpose is forgotten, or it's reinvented. Jews in their long history, and we'll see this when we look at 2,000 years of Roman history, but in any culture, Jews in our long history have been very good at reinventing, taking something from another culture and repurposing and reinventing it, giving it new meaning. And it's quite possible that that's the case here. Other people have suggested these 2 cubiculi weren't made by Jews at all. This is an argument that has pretty much been put aside, but some people said, well, these must have been pagan, And then they just, when they were digging the tunnels, they hit them and they reuse them, that kind of thing. And it is possible because it has happened, but it's more likely these were acculturated, or I won't say assimilated, I'll say acculturated Jews who were comfortable using contemporary Roman artistic vocabularies in their decoration, and that might mean they're wealthier because they have a cubiculum, which would make them wealthier to begin with, and because they're wealthier, they might mingle more with Roman cultural elites and therefore be more susceptible or more accepting of these patterns. But also at the Randonini, we have cubiculi that are strictly Jewish with symbols like the menorah and nothing else. So this is the cubiculo della menorah. So they're not only very close to each other, these different cubiculi, but it just suggests that we have a very varied population using these catacombs. This is one I like very much. It's called the Cubiculo dei Palmi, the cubiculum of the palms, because in each corner there is a palm tree with dates, you can see. And so there are dates here, but not dates, calendar dates. These are edible dates on the palm trees. Some people have said, well, that's a Jewish symbol. And in this context, it probably is Jewish. It recalls the Holy Land. But we have it in Christian art as well. Very common in Christian art to see the palm. So we can't, context is very important. Context is always very important. Birds, I love the chickens. This is from the Cubicula of Pegasus. It's because there's this image of Pegasus on the ceiling, but all these very naturalistic paintings of ducks and birds. And this is what we find in Roman houses for many centuries. This is sort of standard decor. If you go to Pompeii, you'll see it. I was in Assisi recently, and there's a domus, a house that's been discovered, excavated, and there's a wall in this house, a fresco that's painted with something like 100 different types of birds. People think it's every type of bird in Umbria. So Romans love painting nature, and here it fits in a funerary context as well. There are a lot of specifically Jewish symbols, though, too, so we don't want to forget those. These numbers come from Leon's book, and I don't think they've been superseded because he was very thorough. 144 out of 534 inscriptions that he analyzed, well, maybe they're like 600 now. 144 had menorahs, lulav 34, etrog 27, a flask, either of wine or oil, we don't know, 27, the shofar 14, this Aron HaKodesh, the ark 6 times, and then these birds and chickens and other decorations that we saw. But this is the type of plaque that would have been used to seal many of these locali, but over the centuries they've been looted, and so they've been broken into. We've lost a lot of these things, and the plaques have been scattered and broken. Rarely do we find them in situ. Sometimes the poor people wouldn't have plaques at all. They would just have stucco, and they'd be painting with red paint the name of the person, and sometimes there'd not be any name at all. Now, the synagogues, very quickly, there were a lot of synagogues in Rome because there were all these people, these Jews, so we could assume there are a lot of synagogues. And in fact, analysis of the inscriptions from the catacombs suggests that there are 10 or 11 or maybe 13 synagogues. We don't know whether they all were operating contemporaneously, because we know in America, and in especially congregations start and stop all the time, they merge. But we come up with between 10 and 13 different names that scholars have believed belong to congregations. And I'm going to go through them very quickly. If you want to learn more about these, I really recommend the webpage of the International Catacomb Society, particularly their section on Jewish catacombs. This is an organization begun in the 1980s by Estelle Bretman, and then it's really been carried forward, particularly online, through some great work by my friend Jessica Della Russo and others. Or you can still pick up Harry Land's The Jews of Ancient Rome book, which I still think is the most accessible and essentially still correct book. I mean, new things have changed, dates and things like that, but for just an understanding of what the Jewish community of ancient Rome was like, that's a great place to start. So mostly alphabetically, I'm going to run through these, and I'm going to show you, when I can, some of the inscriptions that I've seen and photographed that mention this, but they don't give us really information about the synagogues. certainly not the structure they were in, the building, but really not even about the congregation. So this is going to be recorded, so I'm leaving information about the history of these congregations, what we know, that you can read at your leisure if you're really interested. But this information comes from those two sources that I just gave you. So, but it's just been abbreviated. So this is the Agripenses, the Agripesians. This is a controversial one because some people think it refers to Marcus Agrippa, who was the son-in-law of Augustus, and maybe he was the founder or the patron, but it could have many other reasons for having that name. But we do know there were a long association of imperial patronage of some Jewish communities, particularly in the early centuries. So there could be an association. Here's Augustus, because there's another synagogue called the Synagogue of the Augustasians. So that may refer to Augustus, but it could refer to something else as well. But I wanted to read you one little quote in Suetonius. Suetonius is the Roman author who wrote the famous book 12 Caesars, that Robert Graves' I Claudius is based on that. So he quotes a letter from the Emperor Augustus to his his stepson Tiberius, who would be his successor. He says, "Not even a Jew, my dear Tiberius, observes the Sabbath fast as faithfully as I did today. It was only after the first night hour that I took 2 mouthfuls of food at the bath before my rub down was started." Now he seems to think that the Sabbath was a fast day, and that's understandable because there are always misconceptions. What do we know as Jews? We misconceive, what are the wrong things we say about Islam or Hinduism or something like that out of ignorance. But it meant that he was aware of Jews and he was aware of the Sabbath and he was aware that Jews did fast at different times. So that's the first century. So Jews were already making an impact. This is the Chalcarazians, and lots of different ideas about the Chalcarazians, whether it came from a place or whether it's a district in Rome where the lime workers were. In this, you also see there's a little menorah there. We do get the mention of the title of archon. Archon is like we don't know if it was like the president of the congregation or if it had a religious role, but definitely one of the leaders of the congregation. This is from the Campasians. Again, it could be from Campus Martius, that district of Rome, or it could refer to a person or a place. We really don't know. The Alea, again, we only have one inscription, 2 inscriptions that mention it, but it seems to be a congregation. This one, the Synagogue of the Hebrews, might be the oldest. People think because it's the Hebrews, it was the first. So like many other groups in pagan Rome, they had a confraternity, and to define it, to give the name of the confraternity, it was the confraternity or the congregation, the synagogue, the Beit Knesset, the place of gathering of the Hebrews. And we have synagogues of Hebrews in a few other cities in the ancient world, so that may have been a common designation. And then as other congregations were formed in later centuries, they took other names named after places or people, but the initial one of the Hebrews kept theirs. The Siburazians, it might refer to a synagogue in the area of the Subura, which is today up in the Rione Monti near Santa Maria Maggiore. We just don't know. And then the Tripolitans, there are many cities in the Mediterranean that have the name Tripoli. There's one in Lebanon, there's one in Syria. So where was this a congregation from people from one of those cities? The way in the early 20th century in America, you had, the Vilna Shul in Boston, or you had, other Landsman groups naming their synagogues after the place they came from. We just don't know. So there's lots of articles written, but we really just don't know. It's all guesswork. And Sabina is another one. So we have these references. In the same way, we have, I'm going to skip these last two. We have different titles for people in the synagogue. I mentioned the archon. This fellow, Salo, he had the office of pater, of father. Well, what did that mean in the congregation? We really don't know, but it seems to be a honorific of some sort, and perhaps there was a function associated with it. Now, other types of decoration. I mentioned these glass plates with gold pressed in between two levels, like a sandwich of glass. I think we know 14 of these. And as I said, they're not found in situ. They're not unique to Jews. We have them for Christians and we have them for pagans. I should show you, but for time I'm not. But they seem to be made in the same workshops. So you had a workshop that was creating material for anyone who needed it, but customizing it with the type of decoration that the client requested. Here are a few other examples, and you can see it's the same type of decoration that we saw in the wall paintings and in the plaques, although much more accomplished. This one I want to bring to your attention because you'll see this illustration a lot. It's in the Jewish Encyclopedia. It's been in many, many books. The one on the right. It's actually a drawing that's based on the imprint of one of these glass plates that was stuck in the plaster, and it's long gone. We don't have the original, but the imprint in the plaster remained. And that then was interpreted and drawn this way, published more than a century ago. And it's been very influential because people take this to be, some people take it to be a representation of the temple, very schematic, very simple one. And I was, last 2 months ago, I gave a lecture in New York on the synagogues of the Upper West Side, very different subject from this one. And at the time, so I took the opportunity to go to a number of the synagogues and do new photography. And I went to Anshe Chesed on West 100th Street in New York, and I looked at the stained glass windows. And I was delighted to find this little roundel, this is probably 1928, in that synagogue that's based on this drawing, which had been at that time published for maybe, I think it was published in the Jewish Encyclopedia, maybe 1906, something like that. So these, there's linkages from the past. Well, 1928 is already a century ago, but I consider that, as an historian, I consider that the present. We have sarcophagi. Sarcophagi are coffins, marble coffins. So far, fragments of about 40 of them have been found in the catacombs or near the catacombs, or with some Jewish inscription or Jewish symbol. So generally the corpus of material for stone sarcophagi, it's about 40 items. And these have been analyzed by different people. And I'm just going to show you a few. They tend to be, again, out of a studio, a pagan studio probably, and they could then refine the request to serve the audience. So this is what we call a seasons sarcophagus. It's not all of it, but that's autumn there, and then there's a bit of winter over on the far right, holding probably a dead rabbit or something. And this round place, which is called a clipius, usually you would have the portrait of the deceased in a pagan sarcophagus, but here we have a menorah. So another menorah sarcophagus, another one that is now gone, but we have this drawing. We also have some decorated plaques which recall the decoration on the stone ossuaries from near Jerusalem. So there might be a connection there, a cultural connection there. This is another one, and I like this one. I'm not sure where this is now. I didn't see it when I went to the Vinyanandinidi catacombs. I might have missed it, but the inscription is to Eudoxius, a zographos, which means a painter from life, or a drawer from life, which seems to contradict the second commandment, if you want to go down that road. But it leads us to talk about all the professions of Jews, and they filled many, many different categories. pretty much anything that you can imagine, and they're often described in the descriptions. Okay.
Sam, I'm
Yeah.
just mentioning the time. We
All
have
right.
5 more minutes, and then we'll go a little over with questions because there are quite a few. Is that okay?
Okay. Okay. So I'm going to skip through some of these because I want to show you Ostia, the synagogue in Ostia, but we'll pick up. We'll use Ostia as the jumping off point next for the next lecture as well, because it now is pushed. The date is pushed later. These are other inscriptions. This one for a woman named Regina is very unusual because it has a long poem written by her beloved husband, in which he extols all of her virtues, and it's quite beautiful. It's very unusual, very exceptional, but it does show that that Jews were engaged in kind of literary pursuits as well. Note that it's in Latin. Most of the inscriptions have been in Greek. More than 60% of the inscriptions are in Greek. Okay, and this is another one for a woman of named Primitiva. These are different examples. This one is very touching, so I'll read it. Here lies Samuel, child of a year and 5 months. In peace his sleep. Be of good courage, Samuel. No one is immortal. And this is stuck on the walls of the cloister of St. Paul's outside the walls south of Rome, where a lot of inscriptions have ended up. Okay, so I just want to end this section by quoting Lee Levine, who is a great scholar of ancient synagogues and the art of antiquity. His sort of take on all of this in much more detail than I've presented. The picture that can be drawn about Roman Jewish identity is not inconsequential and certainly far greater than for any other diaspora community in late antiquity. Every aspect of material culture from the catacombs reflects an attempt to include the dimensions of integration and particularism. Jews adopted and adapted pagan and Christian practices and styles regnant in Roman society, but at the same time carved out a range of particularistic practices that serve to define and preserve their self-identity. Sounds very much like, I can't speak for my friends in Israel or Europe, but it's certainly very much like the American Jewish experience in which I was brought up and which I live and am active today. Having created their own insular community, the Jewish community seems to have become quite comfortably ensconced in the Roman cosmopolis. Okay, then just ending up very quickly, we have no physical synagogues surviving from Rome, or at least they haven't been found yet. And we don't know whether they built buildings or they adapted old ones, as congregations often do. Irvine, University Synagogue in Irvine adapted an old skating rink, for instance, ice skating rink. Beautifully adapted. It's a beautiful synagogue today. So the one synagogue that we do have was discovered in 1960 in Ostia Antica, the port city of Rome. It was discovered by accident, and it was published, but poorly published. And 60 years went by before the type of detailed analysis to the site and its finds was actually attempted. And Michael White, who's a professor at the University of Texas, has for the last 20 years been leading a very intensive effort with the archaeological park at Ostia, and they've been publishing a lot of this new material, which totally changes our perception of this synagogue. Many of you may know this particular image. This is my photo from last year, but these 4 columns, a quadriporticus and this apse, brick and tufa block apse, have become emblematic of this synagogue. This is what it was like when it was found. They were putting through a highway. They didn't know it was going to be Jewish, even though there are some inscriptions around Ostia that give some history, Jewish history. This is the way, after they reconstructed the parts, they believed it looked. Here's the prayer room. This is going to be the ark, and the bema is up there. The entrance is here off to the side. We won't go into all of this analysis, but important, it had a number of ancillary spaces. And this is typical of synagogues of antiquity, just like the Jewish community center of the 20th and 21st century. It has a kitchen, it has a dining hall, it has a social center, and it served the community in many different ways. And the archaeological record is pretty clear what these spaces were and where they planned out. what recent excavations and analysis have shown is that this was not from the 1st century, as the original excavators posited, with a rebuilding in the 2nd or 3rd. It's that probably the early synagogue was probably adapted, a pre-existing building, and then there's an intermediate phase in which the entrance is here where this red line is, and then there's a prayer hall here, not so many ancillary spaces, a well down here. We have an inscription, a famous inscription that talks about the building and the dedication of the building and the ark, or just the ark. And it's called the Mindus or Mindius Faustus inscription. And this probably relates, at least Michael White believes, and I think it sounds good, to the adaptation of the pre-existing building into a synagogue. This is the final plan, which seems to date after an earthquake of 443, and the synagogue in the state that we appreciate with this quadriporticus. It's a four doorway entranceway, and that curved apse for a Torah ark seems to date from this late phase of the 5th century. The entrance has been moved further down because of changes in the sidewalk and the street here. They had to close up the door on the side, probably some windows as well, but they expanded some of the other spaces. And just remember, this is all reconstructed, and a lot of this is from the 1960s. This is a recent idea of what the interior might have looked like, looking from the vestibule through the quadriporticus to the bema, and then you would have had to turn around to face the ark, which you see here in its current state. It's known for these big brackets with menorahs on them. This one has just been reinstalled in the Ostia Museum, and we can tell that it probably was gilded. It had gold, red and gold on it. And this is actually what Michael White's reconstruction of the ark looks like. This is the one that we've been seeing in publications for many, many years, but the one on the right seems to reflect a careful analysis of all the archaeological finds. And so you have all these different spaces: dining room, kitchen, prayer hall, really a big community center. And I'm going to leap ahead. These are just a few of what you see today. This is the kitchen area. Lamps were found there. And I'm going to jump ahead to something that was just discovered last year, but only announced this year. It's a mikveh, Jewish ritual bath, also found at Ostia. And it was found underneath a very luxurious house, a big, what's called a domos. And the domos is actually in the center of town, right next to the theater, not way on the periphery by the shore where the synagogue is. So here's the synagogue way down here on the edge of town. This was the sea, this was the beach. And the mikveh is here, and this is the theater, and this is the center of town. And this was just discovered within the last year, and more excavations have to be done around the whole area to tell us more about the house. But it was built, the domos was a large, luxurious Roman domos, a house with black and white mosaics, frescoes, a kitchen, latrines, 2 ovens, and a small immersion pool, now identified as a mikveh. And so the assumption is that the house belonged to a wealthy Jewish family. And I'm going to leave it at that, because that gives us a jumping off point, because we're talking the 5th century now, late 400s. Most people think that ancient Rome ends earlier. We're talking about the Flavians, maybe the Severans, but we don't go much later. And this is a period when Christianity is supposed to be running rampant through the empire. But Rome still has a strong Jewish community and a strong pagan community quite late. And we're going to pick up that story next week when we talk about the Middle Ages and go all the way up to the early 16th century, before the imposition of the ghetto. Thanks.
Sam, thank you so much. We're a little over time, but we'll jump into a few questions, and I'll try to collate because we have quite a lot. So a few about the Hebrew ambassadors that joined from Rome in effort to fight the Greeks. Did they get support from Rome? What happened afterwards in that relationship? And if you can say a few words about that.
Well, think about like Vietnam or something. You know, when a small power goes to a big power and asks for help, in the end, the wolf will eat the mouse. And that's what happened. Rome was the wolf, and the Jewish state was the mouse. And within a very short time, um, Rome dominated. So I believe they did get some help, but not. It was not. The essential it's yeah, but that's a story. I'm not in I can't tell you more details because I'm not expert in that history.
Okay, so a few questions about the catacombs. First of all, there was a question if Jews ever used ossuaries like in other places. Another question, I'll just do a few in a row, was how long did it take to build the catacombs? And given the labor and the elaborateness, does that mean that the people that were buried there were wealthy and others were buried elsewhere? And one last question about them. Are there any or were there any symbols found of Kohen hands on any of them, which is a symbol we didn't see in what you showed us?
No Kohen hands. The catacombs were cheap to build, and it was partly an economic decision. You could buy one plot of land, and then from that you could tunnel out in all different directions. The Christians did the same. Rome has a type of stone. It's a volcanic ash called tufa, which has the virtue of being very easy to quarry. You can cut it. People describe it as like cutting butter. But when it's exposed to air, it gets very hard. So what you could do, you could cut your tunnel, and you're cutting your blocks for building right from the tunnel, and you're creating new space, but you're using your blocks to create entranceways, and probably there were superstructures as well that we don't know about. This was certainly true with the Christian catacombs. So, and the catacombs, most of the people who were buried in the catacombs seem to have been poor or at least of modest means. The only signs of wealth are those 40, marble sarcophagi and these dozen or so cubiculi with the nice paintings. Most people were just stuck in a slot and sealed up, and that was it. And there are remains of bones 2,000 years later. In recent years, there have been intensive cleaning efforts with under rabbinic supervision, particularly most recently at the Villa Torlonia, which will be open to the public at some point in some way. And all of the bone fragments have been removed and put in a single cubiculum, and it's been sealed permanently as a eternal grave. And that's been done with the Jewish community of Rome, which has partial control. They only wrested control over the catacombs in 1989. The Vatican controlled them until that time. So Jewish scholars had a hard time studying and getting access to these places. And then also with rabbinic authorities in Israel.
So actually
cooperation with the state, yeah.
So that answers maybe only partially the question if people who visit Rome can go and see the burial chambers. Is it just that one you mentioned that will be opened?
If you want to know more how to visit, go to the webpage of the International Catacomb Society. The Villa Torlonia, I don't know that it's open yet, but I know they've been giving limited access to groups. I worked on conservation studies at the Villa Torlonia catacomb 30 years ago. And at that time, we recommended no access because it would be harmful. It would destroy the catacomb in no time. But over the years, there have been interventions, and I think small groups will be able to, on appointed times, are going to be allowed in. They've also made copies of many of the decorations. I think they're installed there at the Villa Torlonia. I haven't been yet, but there are also copies installed in the new Jewish History Museum in Ferrara, which you can see full-scale copies of the cubiculi. the Vigna Randonini is still privately owned, and you can go, but you have to make an appointment and pay the caretaker. And you can pay, it's like €100, but you can take as many as 10 or 15 people if you want to arrange a trip. And the contact information, I believe, is on the webpage of the International Catacomb Society. But if not, I have the name of the caretaker since he took me in March. So
amazing. Thank you. All crucial CSP contacts. I'm going to end with two quick questions about the inscriptions. One is that we haven't seen any of them in Hebrew. Is there a reason for that? And the
yeah,
other, maybe I'll let you answer that one, and then we'll go to the last one.
yeah, virtually no Hebrew. Occasionally you'll get a shalom, maybe, we're not sure. There's a little bit of Aramaic in the what was the Monteverde catacomb, which was destroyed, and I didn't talk about that, but a number of the inscriptions we looked at came from there. That was discovered. That's the one that was discovered in 1602, and then kind of lost. But tablets, inscriptions were collected, and they've circulated around the world. And there is one bilingual. I think it's a Aramaic Greek inscription, but generally these people didn't speak Hebrew, and we're not even sure many of them read it or knew it. Probably not. They may have been uneducated when they came. They may have been uninterested. But Greek, remember that Greek was the primary language of most Jews everywhere in the world in antiquity. Not Hebrew and not even Aramaic. Greek was the dominant language, the way English increasingly is today. And yeah, so that's the answer. But it does tell us a lot, and obviously there's been a lot written about this, suggesting that this was a religiously illiterate community. And there's a lot of debate how Jewish was the Jewish community of Rome. And that's something, every time we have a new discovery, it changes the argument. The mikveh, finding that mikveh, that's the only mikveh known, I think, from antiquity outside of Israel. I may be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure we have some in the Middle Ages. We begin getting a lot in Europe in the Middle Ages. So that changes, suddenly people in Ostia were using a mikveh. Okay, so that indicates some level of observance. Even the Emperor Augustus saying that Jews are honoring the Sabbath, that's an important clue. Putting all these together, it allows people to construct theories, but they're only theories. We have no confirmation. So.
Thank you so much. I must say we do have many more wonderful and amazing questions, but we need to end. I'm assuming some of them will be answered in the next two parts, and many of them will be answered in the follow-up email and the information that we'll be sending out. Thank you.
Shalom, everybody. Have a good week, and I hope I'll see you next Tuesday as well.